Welcome back to the Shema podcast, my friends. I'm going to be sharing with you the teaching that I gave at the Shavuos event that I hosted. But before I do that, I thought it'd be fun to get a few friends together to have a roundtable conversation about the Shavuos event. So I have with us here today in the Shema podcast studio, Larry David, Ben Shapiro, Jack Black, and Adam Sandler to share their thoughts on the Shavuos all-night learning event.
Can we start with the obvious question everybody had Thursday night? How exactly did Dan end up in the middle of a lineup of actual Torah scholars? We had Rabbi Aryeh Wolbe and Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe, Rabbi Mizel, and Rabbi Pill. Then suddenly Dan Coleman. I mean, it's like one of these things is not like the others.
I noticed that immediately. I mean, these are serious rabbis. They don't need to do AI app stunts like this to get listenership, and somehow Dan wandered into the rabbinic lineup.
It did feel a little like somebody accidentally double booked the room.
Larry, I'm not going to argue with you. I don't see any of these rabbis needing to lean on doing AI stunts either. I concede. But it is a good way, either way, to provide a nice recap of the event for those who could not make it and are considering joining us next year, as I do plan to make this an annual event.
To be fair, the event itself was remarkably substantive. Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe's discussion of leadership and the downfall of the princes was genuinely sophisticated. Rabbi Aryeh Wolbe's framework regarding elevating material existence through Torah was extremely compelling. Rabbi Mizel tied the entire evening together through the concept of the Jewish people unified around Torah. Rabbi Pill's point regarding uncertainty, emunah, and bitachon as necessary conditions for relationship was philosophically important, and Dan's teaching actually fit surprisingly well into the progression by framing Torah itself as a system meant to transform separateness, consciousness into mutual responsibility and connectedness.
That's the nicest possible way to say that Dan somehow survived in the lineup.
What was genuinely interesting, though, was that none of the speakers coordinated topics, yet every talk naturally flowed into the next one.
Honestly, though, what made the night special wasn't just the speakers. It was the people who came. A lot of listeners from the Shema podcast WhatsApp group finally met each other in person after years of learning together online.
And the attendees themselves were unusually engaged and genuinely wanted to learn, which changes the atmosphere completely.
The conversations between the teachings were almost as meaningful as the teaching themselves.
Can we also acknowledge that everybody knows the amazing food spread was entirely his wife and had absolutely nothing to do with Dan?
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your input on the event. I thought it was very meaningful, and I couldn't agree more that it was the guest as well as the speakers that made it such a meaningful Shavuos night.
Welcome to the Shema Podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights intertwined through personal stories as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. To share feedback, suggest future topics, or ask questions for the host or his guests, click the show notes to join the growing WhatsApp community. Now to the show.
So the ideas that we are going to explore from the writings of the Baal HaSulam is regarding the purpose of Matan Torah, the purpose of receiving Torah. And this is very important because if we do not clearly understand the purpose of Torah, then we do not know how to measure success in Torah. If Torah is merely law, then success means compliance with the law. If Torah is merely identity, then success means belonging. If Torah is merely knowledge, then success means understanding ideas. The idea Baal HaSulam develops throughout his essays is that the purpose of Torah is to transform the orientation of mankind from the will to receive toward the will to bestow. Before we get into that, though, there is another idea that will help us frame this discussion. It comes from a podcast I did with Rabbi Pill on the month of Sivan, where we explored why the energy of the month manifests through the mazel of the twins, which represents duality. The text I had studied explained that the month of Sivan, and therefore the mazel of the twins, is about discovering unity within multiplicity. And I asked Rabbi Pill, if Hashem began as absolute oneness, why create duality and multiplicity, only for creation to struggle to rediscover unity? It almost seems as though the goal is to simply return to where everything began. What Rabbi Pill explained begins shedding light on our entire topic. Rabbi Pill explained that there is a profound difference between simple unity and unity that emerges through diversity. Simple unity exists when there is only one thing, but the deeper revelation is when many things remain fully distinct and yet become integrated into a greater wholeness. And this is exactly what Torah is trying to accomplish, and why it had to be given specifically in the month of Sivan. The goal is not the destruction of individuality, but the integration of individuality into unity. The primary teaching that Baal HaSulam references in his essay Matan Torah is the verse in Vayikra, love your fellow as yourself. Rabbi Akiva teaches that this is the greatest principle of the Torah. Hillel tells the convert in Shabbos 31a, what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Baal HaSulam argues that we should not read the teachings of Rabbi Akiva and Hillel as merely ethical slogans, but as foundational principles, revealing the inner architecture of Torah itself. If love your fellow as yourself is the greatest principle, and the rest is commentary, then all the remaining mitzvos become part of a single transformational system built around this one idea. Normally, we divide mitzvos into categories of between man and Hashem and between man and his fellow man. But Baal HaSulam says the inner purpose behind both categories is ultimately the same, to transform the human being from receiving to giving. The reason they are linked is because, according to Baal HaSulam, dveikus with Hashem is not achieved through physical closeness, but through similarity of form. And Hashem is the ultimate bestower. Therefore, when we perform mitzvos in our relationship with other people, we begin emulating Hashem's form as a bestower. The transformation then allows the mitzvos between man and Hashem to properly attach to and elevate the person toward their ultimate goal. Both categories of mitzvos are part of the same transformational process meant to move the human being toward dveikus, which is why Torah functions as an integrated structure designed to produce a different kind of human being. And this becomes especially important on Shavuos because Baal HaSulam forces us to ask a much deeper question than merely, did we receive the Torah? The deeper question becomes, are we allowing Torah to do what it was given to us to do? The problem is that this mitzvah of loving your fellow as yourself seems impossible once you apply the Torah's actual definition to it. Baal HaSulam shows that the Torah does not leave the mitzvah vague or ambiguous because ambiguity would leave room for the Yetzer Hara to define it for us. Love your fellow as yourself does not merely mean being polite, respectful, or compassionate when it's convenient. It means another person's needs must matter to me with the same urgency and priority as my own. Baal HaSulam brings an example from the Gemara in Kedushin 20a regarding a Hebrew servant. The Gemara discusses a case where the master has only one pillow, while the servant has none. In such a case, the master cannot simply keep the pillow for himself while leaving the servant without one. The Gemara concludes, whoever acquires a Hebrew servant is like acquiring a master over himself. Baal HaSulam uses this example to show how radically Torah defines responsibility toward another human being. And if you truly contemplate this teaching, it becomes very uncomfortable because it immediately raises deeper questions. If there's only one of some resource, do I instinctively take it for myself, or can I genuinely experience another person's need with the same intensity as my own? And if we are honest, this does not merely seem difficult, it seems impossible. Not because we are bad people, but because ordinary human nature experiences itself as separate. I feel my own pain directly. Another person's pain I experience only indirectly. I feel my own hunger immediately while another person's hunger reaches me abstractly. This is what we call separateness consciousness, the condition in which the self feels primary, the other feels secondary. And giving feels like a loss because the other is experienced as outside of me. But there are moments in life where separateness temporarily dissolves. One of the clearest examples is the relationship between a mother and her newborn child. A mother loses sleep, exhausts herself, and gives endlessly to a helpless child. And yet the giving is often experienced as love rather than burden. Why is this? The answer is because the child is not fully experienced as other. The boundary between the mother and her child begins dissolving. Giving feels difficult primarily when the recipient is experienced as separate from the self. And that is precisely the human condition that Baal HaSulam wants us to confront. He says that the Torah commands something that must ultimately be possible. But the mitzvah is not describing where we begin, it's describing what Torah is meant to make possible. Baal HaSulam explains that the purpose of creation is rooted in Hashem's desire to give good to his creations. But there is a problem. If the created being simply receives without participation, then the receiving itself creates shame. This is the concept often referred to as bread of shame. The receiver feels incomplete because he remains only a taker, while true wholeness and ultimate pleasure comes from becoming a giver. Therefore, creation requires a process through which the human being becomes capable of receiving without shame by learning to receive in order to bestow. Torah and mitzvos are that process. At first glance, some mitzvos seem difficult to connect to this idea. It's easy to understand how acts of kindness or charity can train a person toward giving. But how does not shaving with a razor, or shaking a lulav, or refraining from wearing clothing made of wool and linen, how does that transform someone from self-love toward love of others? And perhaps the answer is hidden precisely within that question. The human being naturally experiences himself as independent and autonomous, but every mitzvah interrupts that illusion. When a person performs a mitzvah without fully understanding its cosmic effect, he is already participating in a profound transformation because the ego naturally insists that one should only act when something makes sense according to his own understanding. So performing mitzvos, especially when we do not fully understand their rationale, train a person to stop making the ego's understanding the condition for action. And then through thousands of these moments across a lifetime, the person slowly begins changing from what do I want toward what does Hashem want. Baal HaSulam explains that Israel's role is not that of tribal superiority, but of responsibility. The Jewish people are meant to become a model through which humanity itself can gradually move toward connection, bestowal, and rediscovery of its shared divine source. This is why the Torah calls Israel a kingdom of priests. A priest serves. Israel's role is ultimately to become a channel through which humanity can begin repairing its separation and rediscovering connectedness. And this becomes even deeper through Baal HaSulam's understanding of humanity itself. According to Baal HaSulam, humanity is not ultimately a collection of unrelated beings learning to behave morally toward one another. Humanity is actually one interconnected spiritual organism experiencing itself through separateness consciousness. And redemption is the gradual rediscovery of that underlying unity. This also deepens how we understand what Torah has to offer the nations of the world. Often we think primarily in terms of the 7 Noahide laws, and certainly these laws are foundational. But those laws themselves are also part of a much larger objective, not merely creating orderly societies, but gradually moving humanity away from violence, exploitation, domination, which are all radical self-centeredness, and towards responsibility, connectedness, and recognition of a shared divine source. The laws are not merely the endpoint. They are part of the gradual repair of the human condition itself. Sinai marks the beginning of that process, and this also changes how we understand spirituality itself. Spirituality is not escape from ordinary life. Work, family, business, relationships, and community all become part of the process because Torah is not only testing ritual observance. Torah is exposing and transforming our orientation from self-love toward love of others. But this raises another important question. If Torah is meant to transform the human being, where does the process actually begin? Baal HaSulam recognized that people do not begin with pure motives. Most people begin performing mitzvos lo lishma, not for their own sake, but for reward, honor, social acceptance, external validation, or fear of punishment. And Baal HaSulam explains the danger is not that we begin imperfectly. That is simply the starting point by design. This is why Rabbi Avigdor Miller continually emphasized that the objective of a Jew is not Torah observance as an end unto itself, but using Torah mitzvos as a system through which a person changes himself. If I fall into a trap of believing that becoming Torah observant means my mission is complete, then I can remain fundamentally the same self-centered and egocentric person I was before, only now dressed in religious behavior, wearing tzitzits and eating kosher. The process is meant to gradually move the human being from lo lishma, acting from self-oriented motives, towards lishma, acting for the sake of the mitzvah itself in alignment with Hashem. Torah observance can either dismantle self-love or become its most sophisticated costume. A person can become more observant, more knowledgeable, and more respected while remaining fundamentally self-centered. And that may be one of the greatest dangers in religious life, and one that both Rabbi Avigdor Miller and Baal HaSulam repeatedly warn about. Baal HaSulam, in his essay, Arvos, which means mutual responsibility, explains that the Torah cannot be given to isolated individuals, not even to Abraham, Yitzchak, or Yaakov, because love your fellow as yourself cannot fully function in isolation. Only when an entire nation accepts mutual responsibility does the mitzvah become realistically livable. If everyone is committed to caring for everyone else, then the individual no longer needs to exist in constant self-protection. And this explains why before Sinai, the Torah says the people stood as one man with one heart. Unity came before revelation because unity is a necessary vessel for Sinai. And now the entire structure begins fitting together. Torah transforms the human being from receiving toward giving. Mutual responsibility creates a structure that allows that transformation. Unity becomes a vessel capable of holding revelation. Without mutual responsibility, every person remains trapped inside survival consciousness. But when people begin caring one another, something entirely different becomes possible. Mutual responsibility means every member of the nation becomes responsible for the well-being of every other member, not only emotionally, but structurally. This is why Baal HaSulam sees mutual responsibility as essential to Matan Torah itself. Torah creates a people, a covenant, and a structure capable of sustaining transformation. Baal HaSulam also teaches that the will to receive for oneself distorts perception itself. A person naturally experiences reality through the lens of self-interest. Everything becomes filtered through the question, how does this affect me? For example, two people can hear the exact same criticism and experience it completely differently. One person may hear useful feedback, another may immediately experience insult, disrespect, or attack. The external words may be identical, but the ego instinctively reshapes perception around self-protection. The person is no longer seeing reality objectively. He is seeing reality through the lens of self-interest. And this distortion affects not only morality, but perception itself. The ego does not merely seek pleasure, it reshapes perception around self-interest. And because separateness consciousness feels natural, a person often does not even realize he is trapped inside of it. And this raises a much deeper question. To understand why Torah is necessary at all, we first have to understand what changed in the human condition itself. And this brings us back to Adam and Chava before the sin. Many Torah sources understand Adam and Chava before the sin as existing in a fundamentally different human condition than we experience now. Before the sin, evil was more externalized. The serpent confronted humanity from outside itself. The human being still possessed free will, but the distortion of self-centeredness and separateness had not yet become internalized within human consciousness. After the sin, good and evil became intermixed within the person and made the struggle of perceiving separateness, fear, and self-protection feel natural. This is why Torah becomes necessary. As it says in the Gemara, in Kedushin 30b, I created the Yetzer Hara and I created the Torah as an antidote. Torah is a system designed to gradually transform the human condition itself, slowly moving the person from isolated selfhood toward connectedness, alignment, and ultimately the will to bestow. Now fast forward to Sinai. Chazal teach that before revelation descended, something happened first. The people stood as one man with one heart. Unity became the vessel capable of holding revelation, and this did not erase individuality. 12 tribes remained 12 tribes. Different personalities remained different personalities. Sinai was not the destruction of multiplicity, it was the integration of multiplicity into unity. And it was precisely through that alignment and connectedness that humanity temporarily rose again into a condition resembling Adam and Chava before the sin. Chazal teach that the impurity of the Yetzer Hara was removed. The internalized distortion of separateness temporarily loosened its hold. Chazal described physical healing, clarity, and extraordinary revelation because the human being itself was brought into greater alignment. But this now raises the central question. If humanity had once again become freed from the internalized Yetzer Hara, how could the golden calf still happen? The answer is that revelation is not the same thing as permanent transformation. Adam before the sin also existed without an internalized Yetzer Hara, yet the possibility of confusion and choice still remained. Sinai revealed what humanity could become, but revelation descended from above is not the same thing as truth permanently integrated within the human being. The people experienced the truth, but they had not yet become the truth. And this may be one of the deepest ideas in all of Torah. Hashem can create the human being, but the human being must participate in creating himself into the image of Hashem. If transformation were imposed permanently from above, then humanity would remain only a passive receiver. And that would recreate the very problem Torah came to repair, bread of shame. The purpose of Torah is not merely to reveal truth to humanity, it is to gradually transform the human being into a vessel capable of permanently holding that truth. The ultimate goodness Hashem wants to give cannot merely be handed to humanity externally. It must become internally acquired. This is why Torah itself becomes necessary. The process of Torah, mitzvos, struggle, exile, refinement, and return is not a detour from redemption. It is the gradual construction of a human being capable of permanently holding redemption. And because the transformation had not yet become fully internalized at Sinai, the possibility of collapse still remained. Once uncertainty entered, the people could still retreat back into self-protection and visible control. The golden calf, therefore, is not merely a failure of obedience. It is a collapse back into separateness consciousness. Sinai temporarily lifted humanity above its ordinary condition. But final redemption is when the human condition itself becomes transformed. At Sinai, heaven touched earth. Final redemption is when earth itself becomes capable of permanently holding heaven. Humanity will no longer merely know truth intellectually while continuing to react from fear, separateness, and self-protection. Truth itself will become stabilized within the human being. Torah, mitzvos, struggle, exile, return, suffering, refinement, and generations of spiritual labor are all part of the gradual internalization of the truth Sinai revealed in a moment. And the same problem appears again later in Torah history. Chazal tell us that Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students who died because they did not treat one another with proper respect. This is especially striking because Rabbi Akiva is the very sage that taught that love your fellow as yourself is the greatest principle of the Torah. Rabbi Joey Rosenfeld explains that the problem was not merely lack of politeness, but that each student stood as a complete system unto himself. Each one possessed Torah, each one possessed truth, each one possessed understanding. Each one remained too separate. Torah knowledge existed within individuals, but the vessel of connection was missing. And that means Torah itself can become absorbed into ego instead of dissolving ego. But the story does not end there. After the death of Rabbi Akiva's students, Rabbi Akiva began again with a much smaller group of students, among them Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But the Zohar is not presented primarily as isolated lectures or abstract philosophy. It unfolds through companions, traveling together, encountering situations together, questioning together, and revealing Torah through relationship and shared experience. Torah no longer appears merely as information possessed by separate individuals. Revelation emerges through connection itself. Rabbi Akiva taught, love your fellow as yourself. This is a great principle of Torah, but perhaps his first generation of students still struggled to fully embody the vessel necessary to hold that truth. Then Rabbi Shimon and his companions began rebuilding that vessel through humility, fellowship, and shared revelation, because revelation descends most fully into unified vessels. Throughout Chazal and later Torah thought, we repeatedly encounter the idea that unity creates a vessel for the revelation of the Shekinah. This is why the Mishkan requires collective contribution. The Beis HaMikdash functioned as a national center. 10 Jews learning Torah bring Shekinah. Husband and wife can bring Shekinah between them. And Sinai required one man with one heart. The opposite of revelation is separateness, consciousness. The more human beings experience themselves as isolated selves, the harder it becomes to perceive connected spiritual reality. And this reframes holiness itself. Holiness is not merely ritual precision. Holiness is movement toward integrated reality, toward connectedness, towards alignment, towards unity. Baal HaSulam in the essay, From My Flesh Shall I See God, points to the human being itself as a hint toward deeper spiritual reality. The body appears as one unified being, yet beneath that unity are different organs, systems, and functions. The heart does not become the liver. The eye does not become the ear. Unity does not erase distinction. Unity integrates distinction. And perhaps this is exactly the kind of unity Torah is trying to reveal within humanity itself. No organ experiences itself as fully independent. The eye does not compete against the ear. Each part exists within a larger integrated reality. Baal HaSulam teaches that the human body hints towards a deeper spiritual reality shared by humanity itself. The Torah is not merely commanding moral behavior between unrelated beings. It is training humanity to rediscover an underlying connectedness that has become concealed. And this also reframes suffering, conflict, and war. When separateness dominates perception, one person harming another feels natural. But from the perspective of deeper unity, humanity harming itself becomes as irrational as one hand stabbing the other. One of the questions running through all these teachings is why loving others feels so difficult. The answer is separateness consciousness. Perhaps this also sheds light on Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Moshe is greater than every other human being, yet the Torah describes him as the humblest of all men. Ordinarily, greatness increases ego because separateness consciousness experiences itself as central. But Moshe's consciousness becomes increasingly oriented around Hashem and Klei Yisrael rather than around himself. This is why Chazal constantly portray Moshe pleading for the people, suffering with the people, and refusing separation from them. His individuality did not disappear. Moshe remained uniquely Moshe, but isolated selfhood weakened. And perhaps this is the deeper meaning of humility in Torah. Not self-hatred, not weakness, but the gradual diminishing of separateness consciousness itself. Exile is not only geographic. Exile is also internal fragmentation, because a person can sit in a base midrash and still experience himself as fundamentally isolated. Communities can share institutions and still lack true connectedness. Perhaps this is why the exile of Edom is so unique. Previous exiles were visibly external. Babylon conquered us. Persia ruled us. Greece oppressed us. Rome destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. But the exile of Edom became increasingly internalized. Today, there are no Roman armies preventing Jews from returning to Israel. Yet even physical return does not automatically end exile, because the deeper exile is the experience of disconnected existence itself. This is why Chazal connect the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash to baseless hatred. The Beis HaMikdash was not merely a building, it was a vessel for the revelation of unified spiritual reality within the world. And separateness consciousness destroys the vessel capable of holding that revelation. Redemption, therefore, is not merely political restoration. It is the gradual repair of fragmentation itself. Klei Yisrael rebuilding itself into a vessel capable of holding the Shekinah. And this changes how we understand Shavuos itself. Shavuos is not merely the anniversary of receiving information from heaven. It is the annual reopening of the possibility of transformation. Every year, revelation returns. But Sinai itself teaches us that the revelation alone is not enough. The Jewish people experienced extraordinary revelation at Sinai, yet the transformation was not permitted because truth had not yet become fully internalized within the human being. And perhaps this is why the Jewish people remain awake learning Torah on Shavuos night, not merely to accumulate information, but to place ourselves once again inside the revelation and ask, is Torah only entering my mind? Or is Torah transforming the person I am becoming? Perhaps this is why Torah itself contains many mitzvos, many opinions, many tribes, many personalities, because Torah is revealing how unity can emerge through diversity without erasing the diversity itself. And perhaps this is why the Torah begins with a vet and ends with a lamed, forming the word lev, heart, because Torah is not only trying to fill the mind, it is trying to transform the heart, to move the human being from separateness towards connectedness, from self-centeredness toward bestowal, and ultimately toward dveikus with Hashem.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast.